Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of The Squad Room. I'm your host, Garrett Tesla. I'm an active duty patrol sergeant in Southern California. The Squad Room is about developing, optimizing, and most importantly, maintaining the health and wellness of law enforcement officers around the world. Health and wellness mean a lot of things, and I explore it all here. How can we maintain and improve our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health, our mindfulness, even our leadership? The show is about my journey as a law enforcement officer trying to get better by evaluating my own life and by reaching out to experts to see what I can learn from them. I talk to other cops, doctors, military leaders, even meditation experts. Anyone who can be a force multiplier in my fitness. Thanks for being with us. Get ready for another great show. Today we have former Green Beret Aaron Barruga on the show, founder of Guerrilla Approach firearms training. Stay with us. All right, welcome to episode 36 of The Squad Room. I'm your host, Garrett Tesla. Like I said, I'm an active duty patrol sergeant in Southern California. To learn more about me or my history, check out episodes 1 and 2 to hear my whole backstory. Before we jump right into the show, I want to thank our sponsors for this episode, SB Tactical and the iCombat Active Shooter Training System. The iCombat Training System is an active shooter and firearms qualification system. Now, the beauty of this system is that it doesn't require any site prep, there's no ammo cost, it's completely mobile. Even my department has used it in vehicle interdiction, actually. So you can even use it from a helicopter. That's how cool it is. Now, how you ask? It's like laser tag for cops. Each officer is outfitted with gears and sensors that go over their uniform, and it fits any combination of uniform out there. So if you're a SWAT officer and you wear a bulky tac vest, no problem. It'll fit. Plainclothes narcotics, again, no problem. It'll fit. It's fully adjustable. You can learn more about iCombat training systems at sbtactical.com. They're veteran-owned and American-made. Now, speaking of veteran-owned, I have a veteran with me, Aaron Barruga, former Green Beret. Welcome to the show, Aaron.
Thanks for having me, Garrett.
Now, a pleasure to have you here. I'm excited about this because we actually don't know each other. We met about, 15 minutes ago.
I've seen you on the internet through social media.
As have I.
So I know you just about as much as I know a bunch of other people.
Right, so you have the same familiarity with me as you might with, Taylor Swift.
Is she listening to this?
That'd be kind of cool if she is, but I highly doubt it. She's probably more likely to follow you because you're the social media guru of the two of us, if there is such a thing. But anyway, so we haven't met, so I'm looking forward to this because I want to get to know you. And usually, I have this. I record something in advance with a little bio about the person and what we're going to learn and what we're going to talk about, that sort of stuff. But because you're here live and in the flesh, I want to learn about it along with my guests, or not my guests, my listeners. You're my guest. So, like I mentioned, you're the founder of Guerrilla Approach firearms training, and that's what you're doing now. Right?
Yes, that's correct.
Amongst other things, but there's going to be an interesting story about how you got to that. You didn't just wake up one day and decide you're going to go teach people how to go shoot the firearms and all that. So, what? Tell me your story of what got you to that point. And maybe an easier way to answer that question is, we mentioned your former service, and that you're a veteran. Tell me about the story about how and why maybe you decided to join the military.
So we'll go all the way back to when my dad got back from Vietnam and met my mom. No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to go that far back. My dad actually wasn't in Nam. Every male on my side of the family, though, did serve. Going back to my grandfather, he's a Filipino, immigrated in illegally in the 1930s. And he was just looking for work up and down the coast in California. And World War II broke out, Pearl Harbor happened. And him being from the Philippines, he saw that. And then he saw Japan invade the Philippines. And he and his brothers were like, all right, well, I guess we're going to join the army. Like a very, kind of a red-blooded immigrant joins the military kind of story and narrative. So he joins the military, and he was in the 101st, and one day they were in formation, and the officers were coming through the ranks, and they were just pulling out every single brown guy, basically.
Really?
They were like, all right, hey, you, come here, you, come here, you, come here. And they're like, all right, who's from, Malaysia? Or I guess it wasn't Malaysia back then, or was there?
Oh boy, you're asking the wrong guy.
I know.
I was not expecting a geography quiz.
Well, I know. In post World War II, that entire area restructured.
Right.
Which state was what? Okay. someone's gonna already
somebody will
correct us.
Twitters.
Like, you don't even. How Filipino are you? You don't even know. Yeah. Thank you, internet. Please correct us.
Someone will take it.
We're not even talking about shooting, and you're already correcting us.
Right. Yeah.
So he joined the military. He got pulled out for what was going to be a special missions unit that was actually performing what is essentially the Special Forces mission today, unconventional warfare, where they were shaping the environment for MacArthur's invasion forces to go into the Philippines. So I'm going to get to actually my background.
No, this is awesome. Yeah. I love it.
In 20 minutes, we'll get to why I joined the military.
That's fine. It's a long-form podcast. The tape doesn't end, so it's fine.
So he goes through all this awesome, commando training, survival training. He goes through airborne school. He goes through airborne school like in the 40s when airborne school was, still like a prestigious thing. I think 99%, 100% of the people that you ask today who have gone through U.S. Army jump school or airborne school, they're gonna be like, I don't know, that was like
a big deal.
Yeah, you fell out of an airplane. You had to run 5 miles at like a 9-minute mile pace or something. Right. So there was still, I think, more of like the prestige of like, this is an experimental unit. This is Band of Brothers type.
Right,
of
101st.
Yeah,
Kurahi, right?
Yeah, pretty much. So he got assigned to that special mission unit, and then they snuck into the Philippines, a submarine. They loaded up in a submarine. It surfaced near the PI. They rowed to shore and they cached a lot of stuff, and they started going in and just building their network, making contacts with a lot of the guerrillas. And that is a story that stuck with myself and the 3 other male cousins I have in my family. And also their father. So my uncle was in 173rd LURS in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. He's got some interesting stories about that. And then going down to my generation, I have 3 cousins on my uncle's side who one was in the 101st, one was in the 173rd, and another was in the 1st ID. And so it was kind of something that was in our blood. Joining the military was never something that was on my radar until 9/11 happened. Just like a lot of guys in our generation that were compelled to service after that. When I was in high school, I was a sophomore when the towers fell. And after that, there was just no doubt in my mind what I was going to do once I graduated, I had the option to go to college. I could go to school if I wanted to. I could have done that. But it's just, nothing else seemed important at that point other than serving. And I didn't know anything about Iraq or non-state actors or sovereignty of different states and whether or not terrorist organizations are able to influence domestic attacks. I didn't know any. I was just an 18-year-old kid that was like, nope, country needs people to go fight. I'm gonna go fight. So that's how I ended up joining the services. Graduated from high school. Knew that every single guy on my side of the family had been either in the combat arms in the infantry, or in my grandfather's case, a very special assignment, kind of a precursor to special forces in a way. Yeah. So I originally went into the recruiter's office and I was like, hey, let's get me an infantry contract. And then they were like, well, would you be interested in this special forces contract? And I was like, yeah, right on. Absolutely. So it was a unique contract that they had at the time. It was it's called the 18 X-Ray Special Forces Recruit. It's a lot of guys from my generation that ended up joining the military. We got that contract and allowed us to go straight from basically basic training to airborne school to selection. It was just a meat grinder up front to, hey, if we can get guys that are capable to perform this mission, then let's get them in there. And if they can make the cut, they make the cut. If not, then they go out to the needs of the Army and proceed from there.
So that's something I always misunderstood then about recruiting is that, and maybe that's because it's new with around the time that you joined, was that you were offered that track so early. You didn't have to go to the regular infantry and then apply to get into special forces from there.
Yeah, the traditional route that most guys would take is, they go into the military, they go to like Ranger Battalion, or they go into the infantry. They spend a few years there, and then they apply for selection, and then they either get picked up or they don't get picked up. The 18 X-Ray contract wasn't particularly new when I signed, or when I was able to apply for it. There's guys that were in the 80s and the early 90s who joined the military as a part of what we called the SF Baby program, where, basically straight off the streets. And there's a lot of pushback in the military, as to like, are you picking the right people? And a lot of guys in SF, not a lot of guys, some guys in FS, we're fucking special. Some of the older guys are like, there's this big SEAL Green Beret rivalry in the military, and they're like, oh, that's just what the SEALs do. They, let their guys in real young, and it's, but the program has proven to be amazing. You attract, the best way I can describe a special forces soldier is it's a professional soldier who hates the Army. A lot of the bureaucracy and like the unnecessary administrative structure that just kind of like, dulls the performance capability of these guys, you find in the big Army, and it's there for a reason. But so, yeah, it attracts different dudes. There's guys that, had PhDs or master's degrees. There's guys who, didn't have PhDs and master's degrees, but they have very unique backgrounds in that maybe they, lived outside of the country, most of their, teenage life or whatever, but they have very unique skills. So it attracts someone to the military that doesn't want to be in Full Metal Jacket, or, they don't want to have a sweet high and tight haircut,
right,
or whatever.
So what is it you think about you specifically that either attracted you to that, but also maybe they saw something in you or in your background where they offered you that?
I think, when I was 18, I don't think I really knew a lot. But I knew that if I was going to be a part of the fight, I wanted to be with the guys that were, at tip of the spear is such an overused phrase, but that's what they were. I was reading a lot about the different actions and the exploits that the Green Berets were having in Afghanistan, especially Afghanistan. That was a paradigm shift for special operations when those guys went in and they invaded, and also with Iraq when those guys invaded. And it was amazing when I actually got to the initial phases of my special forces training. A lot of those guys that were in the initial push, the guys that were in these incredibly ambiguous and hostile environments, they were the guys teaching me and my classmates going through. So it was very inspiring, just to hear these stories about these guys have, like, the horse soldiers in Afghanistan. That's one of the most, I think, prolific narratives with, Green Berets in Afghanistan, where, basically just a very small group of guys were able to overthrow a country, working with the CIA and some conventional units, but just a small group of guys and their ingenuity and grit. Yeah. So I learned about that, and that influenced my decision a lot. And, it was, they said it was the most challenging thing. And I said, all right, let's do this. Let's go,
That's intense.
Yeah.
So when did you actually, ship out, for lack of a better term?
2004. I graduated high school in 2004. And
so we were about 2.5 years into the fight at this point?
Yeah, we were about 2 years into the fight. So, there was no clear sign that this was going to be something that was over,
right,
despite, the initial strategies up front.
Despite the landing on the carrier deck.
Mission accomplished. I love seeing that picture in so many different memes.
Yeah.
Or just using it with, in group text I'm in with buddies, where we could be talking about anything. You send a picture of, mission accomplished. Planning my bachelor party or something.
Yeah.
Mission accomplished. All right, cool.
So what you mentioned the selection process, but once you're in, once they say, okay, you're going on the fast track into special forces, you mentioned jump school, but what are all basic, obviously, right? And you start with basic, but then what are the other certifications you need to get?
Yeah. So everyone has to go through basic training, and basic training is they got 4 months to teach you how to be in the Army. So it's, a lot of guys go in there with the expectation that, they're going to, be turned into these, killing machines, or it's going to be, but it's an incredibly underwhelming experience. It underdelivers, but it's designed for a way to, you got to take someone from, or you got to take a platoon of guys from very different backgrounds and teach them how to be in the Army. So, the standards are a little different. You need them to be able to, salute officers and, respect NCOs, and there's some marksmanship stuff in there and some basic tactics. But it's mostly just to groom guys to be like, hey, this is how you functioned in the military. It's like, all right, roger that. After that, proceeded to airborne school. And then after that, proceeded to what was known as SOPSI. I believe it's still called SOPSI. It's a Special Operations Preparation Course, and it is a 30-day meat grinder where you go from having drill sergeants babysit you to you have these Special Forces cadre. Again, like my guys were the dudes that were riding horses in Afghanistan in 2002, and they just they take the kitty gloves off, and it is, they're looking for the guys that are going to be suitable candidates to go to selection, not to get selected, just to even go to selection. So it's very high attrition rate. And, one of the things I learned about physical fitness then was if you treat guys like they're capable of doing, really hard tasks, if you set the bar high, that inspires a certain type of dude to, want to overachieve and go to that level versus where at like a basic training or something where it's more lowest common denominator standards where, again, they're just trying to get bodies through. Right. It's different. It can be kind of, it kills the motivation factor. But again, it's designed for a different thing. So when we got to SOPSI and it was just like day one, it's like, holy shit, man. This is like, it sucks, but it's awesome. It's like, all right, this is cool. Like, this is where I want to be. Like, I want to be around the dudes that are like, we're going. This is it. So finished SOPSI, went to selection. That was another 30-day process. And I won't spend too much time talking about it because I think there's like enough Discovery Channel shows about it or things where it's been a very well discussed thing. But you go there, but what I found unique about it is the Army is real big on be the team. You gotta look out for the guy on your left and your right, which I agree with. But one of the things that sets special operations apart is the caliber of the individual that they're dealing with, where it's like, hey, you don't leave the guy on your left and your right behind, but we're going to set the bar up here to say who gets to be the guy on your left and your right. Yeah. So it's very motivating, again, to be around those type of individuals where, you're watching, week after week, dudes drop from the class or dudes just quit. And you're like, all right, we're still here. So it's very motivating.
It seems like it'd be motivating in the sense that you want to prove yourself as being worthy of being the guy on the left or the right, right? To your squad mate or your teammate is like, you want to show it to them that you're capable of it almost more than yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something that definitely carries down the line with you. And I'm sure you've seen this too in law enforcement is, it's not about, you, it's about, the organization. It's about the team. It's about, that dude on your left and your right. They are more important than you because, if you have that mentality and they have that mentality, you're going to have a good day. Yeah. Or at least you can control that aspect of, what happens in the mission. But yeah, I think that's very important.
So a lot's made of like buds, and I'll ask you a bit about that. But the equivalent for you for the Army is what is it? Sorry, what was it? What'd you call it?
So buds is, I think it's like a 6-month process. Yeah. So I will give the SEALs credit that I think that they have, one of the most physically demanding weeding out phases in their pipeline. Buds is just, from my understanding, from the SEALs I've worked with and talked to, the ones that haven't gone on to make movies yet.
It's a shorter and shorter list these days.
It's just a meat grinder, but it's a different type of hard. It's, I think it's what, separates SF from a lot of the different other types of special operations is, like out of buds, there's just a dude constantly in your face breathing down your neck. For the Rangers going through RIP, there's, constantly someone just breathing down your neck, and that creates a different kind of stress level. It's effective for measuring different things, but when you get to SF, no one's yelling at you at selection. There's only like 2 days where they amp it up to that, drill sergeant style, like, I'm in your face yelling at you. But what they're trying to assess is they don't want a guy that's motivated by someone being in their face. One of the things they say is the man that needs to be driven is not worth the driving. So they're looking for the individual who doesn't, get motivated by having that immediate stimulus in their face. And what they do is they just make the course so hard that they'll just be like, we don't need to scream in your face. We're just going to make you go ruck for 20 miles a day for, 10 days or something. It's like, all right, cool. Like, roger that. I can deal with that kind of stress.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's what sets, at that initial foundation, shapes your mentality of, what this organization is about. You're going to be in some ambiguous environments, working through a cultural barrier, working through a language barrier, working through a cognitive barrier with a lot of indigenous personnel. And they need a guy who can problem solve and doesn't need to be, yelled at to be motivated. Not that there's anything wrong with that for, stress inoculation or something. It's very useful.
Right.
But, different guys respond to it. So BUDS, I think, is, very difficult up front. Again, I'm not someone who's attended it, so internet's getting ready to
no, this is a sympathetic group.
Yeah, so but like SOPSI was kind of like that grinder style where they're in your face. They're like half treating you like adult, half in your face screaming at you, because in the initial phases I think it is very important to get rid of the person who can't handle being yelled at. They need to identify that person and get rid of them so that they can proceed on with like the real meat and potatoes of training. So I think that would be the biggest difference between like selection, and then the rest of the special forces training, the other, year to 18 months is, again, just big boy rules where the material, or the exercises are just so difficult that, if you want to be there, you want to be there. If not, you can quit.
Yeah. So, this is going to be a stupid question, and I apologize in advance because I just don't have this opportunity to clarify this sometimes, but the difference between Rangers, Green Berets, and Delta. Can you explain that to me real quick?
So the difference is that SF is better than Rangers. No,
I don't mean it that way. Just they have different missions.
No,
right?
I just said that if there's any bat boys listening, they're like, ooh.
Fired it up.
Yeah. So the difference comes down to the doctrinal mission alignment. So Rangers are, they're the premier light infantry unit in the U.S. military. That is a hard hitting group of dudes. That is some, highly motivated, very homogenous organization of young guys that are hitters. They are a hammer and they will go mess things up. And, their doctrinal mission aligns with airfield seizure. That, and what airfield seizure is, they jump in, they would secure an airfield, and then that would allow for follow-on forces or, some other cool mission unit to come in and set up a foundation to work from. But those guys, they're, they are the tip of the spear going in to the breach as a hammer. And that actually changed a lot for them as the wars proceeded in Iraq and Afghanistan. You started to see a lot of the Ranger platoons kind of turn into like these mini, I'd say like Delta Force elements where they're just going out and doing a lot of direct action hits. And that's, I think one of the biggest differences between Rangers and SF is Rangers are doctrinally aligned to do a lot more direct action stuff, whereas the Green Berets, they're designed to do everything leading up to the invasion. So going back to the Afghanistan example, a bunch of guys, or not a bunch of guys, like a
small handful.
Yeah, a small handful of
literally.
guys. These, 10-man, 12-man special forces ODAs would link up with, someone in another government organization or someone from the CIA, and they would go into these non-permissive environments and link up with the indige. So
I'm sorry, I just kept non-permissive.
Yeah.
That sounds like a very nice, polite way of saying a nasty hole of in the earth.
You're not. It's either illegal for you to be here, or, and it's a different mission set in that you go into these places where you're not supposed to be, and you have to link up with these resistance forces where you don't know, if they're vetted. You don't know if they're going to, turn a gun on your back.
Right.
And you're going to go out and you're going to train them, you're going to lead them, and you're going to turn them into a pretty potent fighting force. So from, a big strategic level, from the Department of Defense's point of view, it's very cost effective to send out a 10-man ODA to go raise a battalion of dudes fighting in flip-flops with AKs.
Like Northern Alliance, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's who you would probably be talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. So it allows a lot of different strategic level objectives to be met when you have these guys that are kind of just like, moving around either in their gun trucks or just with a ruck on their back, and they're able to really develop things on the ground. Mm-hmm. So it's very different mission sets. SF still does do a lot of the direct action missions, but our primary, our doctrinal mission is to be aligned with some kind of indigenous force.
Interesting.
And so that's where the difference is between Rangers and SF. And then with Delta, those guys are they're the premier counterterrorism, unit, arguably in the world. Unless you're asking like some guys from DevGru who smoked Bin Laden. I shot Bin Laden. But yeah, they are the premier, counterterrorism unit. They pull from SF and Rangers, and they get to do a lot of the cool guy stuff. I'm not going to speak on their behalf.
Well, no, yeah, but I think it's fascinating that someone thought of this long ago, but that each has a role, mm-hmm. and then they each play that role very well, mm-hmm. and that it's like you can't replace Rangers with Delta to achieve the same. I mean, you probably could, but there's, like you say, doctrinally there's a path for them and a purpose for them, mm-hmm. each individually, that is above and or separate from each other. So it's not like they're competing with each other for these.
Yeah, and it's also the other thing too is like a lot of SF guys would probably make horrible Rangers. A lot of Rangers would probably make horrible SF guys. It's just depending on the personality of the mission set. Like there's a lot of not direct action stuff that SF does kind of behind the scenes that is, I think a lot of it's cool and pretty interesting, but it might not attract that 22-year-old, mm-hmm. sergeant in Ranger Battalion who just like wants to kick doors and sprint off the back of, Blackhawks and
right.
CH-47s. It's very different mentality. So it's, whatever those guys are into. And if you're in that community, you can definitely have access to whatever kind of career path you want. If you're in Ranger Battalion, you can go to SF and you can go to Delta, or if you're in SF, you can go to Delta.
Mm-hmm.
So,
all right. So, you go through all the schools, you obviously finished and everything like that, and you get your first orders. Mm-hmm. Where are they? They're
to Fort Lewis, Washington. I finished language school, learned Indonesian, which was awesome because every firefight I got in Iraq and Afghanistan, I was using Indonesian just like. No, I wasn't. I
was waiting for the end of that.
I never.
Curious where this goes.
I never used it once. So the way the SF groups are aligned is, they're regionally aligned. So first group deals with Asia, third group deals with Africa, which is actually switching now. 10th's doing a lot more stuff in Africa. Fifth group deals with the Middle East. Seventh deals with South America, and 10th deals with Europe. So each group has a specific set of languages that they learn. But once the wars kicked off, it was kind of like, all right.
All in.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense that you would learn a language if your job is to work with indigenous people to mm-hmm. get them trained up.
Yeah, so. And that goes back to the doctrinal, mission mm-hmm. for SF is, we need to have guys that are in there with very limited resources to be able to execute the mission, whether it's, training dudes to go fight the Taliban or, trading, commandos in the Philippines to mm-hmm. do, whatever they're going to be doing over there.
So Fort Lewis, that's actually where my dad did his basic before Vietnam.
Okay.
He got trained up there after getting drafted, actually. So you're in Fort Lewis, and then you end up doing 3 combat tours or more? Or how many?
Well, I do Iraq and Afghanistan. I did some stuff in Asia. Technically, what we did in the Philippines could be considered a combat tour. So let me give some context on this. So in first group, we do a lot of stuff in Asia, as I was just saying. Mm-hmm. And the Philippines has actually been an area where we've lost some guys in the South. There's a huge extremist problem in the South, the southern provinces. And when GWOT kicked off, First was, they were in the Philippines and they were doing a lot of work down there.
GWAT's Global War on Terror.
Global War on Terror, yeah. So doing a lot of work down there, training the commandos, training the police forces, training just their infantry. And, we've lost some guys there. When I got back from Iraq and I was in Ranger School, there was 2 guys in my battalion that got killed in an IED strike. Prior to that, there was guys getting ambushed. There was actually... I believe someone got either a Silver Star or a Bronze Star with a V device because they got ambushed in the Philippines and like dudes were like running up to the gun trucks and this guy was just like smoking people.
Really?
So there's been some Valor Awards handed out for the action down there, but you don't typically hear about it up front. So
you don't, but then I've had other guests on. I've had a few SEALs on the show, and
were they lifting weights while you were interviewing them?
Well, they're former SEALs, so they're all but all good guys. But a lot of them have actually done tours in Asia or the Philippines too. Yep. And then one of my favorite books on the general topic is by a SEAL, The Heart and the Fist, by Eric Reitens, and he had a tour to the Philippines too, where he talks about having similar experiences. So it's interesting. You don't tie the Philippines into that GWAT at all. Yeah, and
it's been a big part of it. It's just that Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan and North Africa have been so much further in the front. So with regards to, I don't consider that a combat deployment. I mean, where we were at, the work we were doing, we knew like where the different insurgent camps were and how close they were to us. But and we were there long enough for it to be considered a combat deployment. I don't really think it was a combat deployment though. Okay. But there's some guys in first group that'll be like, yeah, I've got 3 combat deployments. Like, all right, to where? I'm not saying that that work's not important, but it just kind of.
But Iraq and Afghanistan certainly.
Yeah,
where in Iraq?
I'm just gonna hold back on talking about.
Oh
that.
yeah, I had to think about that.
Well, I mean, and for the listeners, not because it's like I have anything super cool, but like social media is crazy how dudes are finding each other, and I don't know.
That's fair.
Yeah,
that. I didn't even think about that though. That's totally. And then, but Afghanistan as well, right?
In Afghanistan, yeah.
So, how long is a typical deployment?
SF deployment. Yeah, by the time I was in the rotation, deployments were between 10 and 12 months for us.
Oh, that's pretty long, right?
Wait, did you say that's not very?
No, that is pretty long, right? I mean, some of them would be shorter.
Well, the conventional military was doing like 16 months.
Oh, it was? Okay.
Yeah, those guys had it. That's a long time to be gone. Yeah. Really burns out the force. So we, I had been told that there's SF battalions that only deployed for 6 months. I never got to be a part of that, but yeah, I was always gone for for
that's a good amount of time.
Yeah, 10 months. And yeah, that was the length of the deployments.
So, this question will get to the training and what you're doing now eventually, but I wanted to ask, can you tell me or describe to me about the first time you were shot at?
The first time I was shot at,
even if you even remember it at this point.
Yeah. This is where I have my my veteran hat on, my American flag hat, and I just like tip it a little bit. I'm like, well, first time I got shot at. The first time I got shot at, you're like, is this happening? Like, oh yeah, this is happening. So it's one of those things where you train to perform a mission. And, a lot of the training I got in SF, I was, very fortunate that I had, like I said, amazing leaders. We tend to have a bigger budget and ammo allocation in Special Forces, so we get to do a lot more team training. And when you finally get to, the big show, when you finally deploy, you're just like, okay, this is it. And I would compare it to any kind of goal setting you do for yourself in life, whether it's like, hey, I'm training to run a marathon, or hey, I'm I want to learn how to surf or something.
Right.
And then when you finally get to that point where you achieve the goal, you're like, oh, this is it. Okay. So the first time I got shot at, it was kind of that, where it was like, is this really happening? Like, oh, okay, yeah, this is happening. And then everything that I had been trained to do just kind of, switch flipped. And we're performing, a lot of things at a subconscious level, and you're, reacting to the situation and then developing the situation and proceeding forward to do work. And a lot of guys I've talked to, and that wasn't just the first time I got shot at. That was like, the 10th, 12th, 15th, and especially like in Afghanistan, a lot of times we were getting shot at. We're like, is this, okay, yeah, this is it. Because it goes, through this phase of like, all right, is this just harassment fire? So you have to figure out like, okay, are we
just kind of piss you off?
Yeah, like are we getting shot at? Are we getting shot at? Or are we getting fucking shot at, man? So and no one else wants to like also you're in front of like your entire team, bunch of really type A aggressive guys.
Yeah.
You don't want to be the guy that's like, we're getting shot at, and then you're the cherry on the team. We're like, shut the fuck up, it's just harassment fire. Like, okay, but it's really close harassment fire.
Zing. Right, yeah.
Was that RPG harassment fire? Like, okay. So it's like everyone's trying to play cool, and then it's just like, all right, okay, we're getting shot at. So yeah, the first time was just kind of like, this is happening. Okay, this is happening, and then we just we went into reacting to contact and just going forward with the mission.
So is it surreal every time? Or surreal, maybe not the right word, but just kind of.
I think that the best way I can describe it is for like people that have not been shot at, is once you get past that initial phases of like, hey, this is my first time being shot at. Hey, this is my second time being shot at. Is once it happens. So either you're being the one doing the shooting initially, or if you're reacting to it. The switch gets flipped and you're like, all right, it's game time. I'd say it's very similar to, like your mentality is very similar to, like an athlete, anyone who ever has played sports, when you're in the middle of the game and you're just, you're firing on all cylinders. You're plugged into, the basketball court or the football field, whatever it is, and you're able to read the situation and all the different variables and levers that get pulled to influence what's happening. And that's kind of like, I think the level of processing that happens very similar to when you get contact with the enemy, and again, it's not like the first time you get shot at, or like if you're on your second deployment, third deployment, whatever, and it's like, okay, it's our first time getting shot at in country, because you will work through a lot of different things that are taking place. One, it's like, okay, we're getting shot at. Two, what's the team dynamic taking place, and then what kind of other variables there might be. But once you get to the point where you're like, okay, I'm expecting to get in a gunfight, I'm getting in a gunfight. I think it's very similar to, again, like an athlete who is, like, hey, I know I'm, in a football game right now. I almost said football match.
For our English listeners, they would get that. We actually have some, so they would get that.
Awesome. So. They're like, oh, this fucking wanker. Yeah, so you're just plugged into the environment and you're good to go. And that is, I've done some research on this with when your heart rate's at a certain level, you're able to actually function a lot with a lot more clarity of mind. There's something about, I don't want to get the beats per minute wrong, but it's like if it's at a certain beats per minute, you're able to function at a much higher level because it activates, the adrenaline, your fight or flight mechanism. But there's also a certain point where if your heart rate goes too high, you're incapable of doing a lot of that higher level processing.
Yeah, I forget what it's called, but something it's like sensory selection or something like that. Where
that sounds, I'll agree with that.
Your eyes, like for us, we often get discussed about the shootings that we end up getting in are usually very close to each other, and they're very short. Right? There's not extended battles typically. And I've talked to the guys I know who've been in shootings, and they all say something very similar of, time slows down. Things become very clear. What took milliseconds in real life seemed to take an extended period of time when they actually could think through the problem as it was happening. So, suspect has something in his hand, identifies that it's a gun, identifies that he's raising it. All those things that happen in a heartbeat or less, now your mind is processing at such an intense level. So it's interesting that you have that same experience, much more intense. What happens to you, or what was your experience after it was over? I mean, did you collapse in a heap of cortisol and adrenaline and go to sleep? I mean, you can't, but how, this gets to my questions about stress inoculation, but how do you become comfortable with that? And I'm suspecting part of that answer is training, but Yeah. How do you get comfortable?
Yeah, training is obviously a very big part of that. Purposeful training, and I'll go into depth a little bit later on this with how you structure purposeful training to actually prepare a shooter's mind for what happens in the real world versus what just happens on the flat range. But afterwards, what do you do? I think that we all developed these internal methods for decompression. So in Iraq, we had a very different mission. We were doing a lot more of the direct action stuff I was talking about earlier. We were going out in raids. We were driving out in trucks or flying out in helicopters. So part of the decompression method was once we were off the objective, once we were on our exfil route going back to our team house, that kind of started the the processing of what happened. Not to say that something couldn't still happen after that. You still have to be switched on, because you could still drive over a bomb or get your bird shot at. But I think that started it. And then just having a routine afterwards. So whether it's collecting up all of the gear out of the trucks and just cleaning it, or administratively going in to do the reports you have to do, something to some kind of task that's enough to keep you your mind occupied, but it doesn't require a deep level of thinking. And then just talking to your guys about it. I think that's what worked the best in Iraq. In Afghanistan, it was a little different. We had a different mission set. We were doing what was known as village stability operations. So we had a Alamo camp in the middle of nowhere, and that was different because you couldn't ever leave the fight. We were on a camp that was half the size of a football field. There was 20 Americans there. There was my ODA and an infantry squad, and we had an Air Force cook attached to us. That was awesome so I digress, but so there's this, I think of this kid who walks into the recruiter's office and is like, I'm going to join the Air Force. I'm going to, be a cook. And I'll never have to go to combat and I'll get that sweet college money. He finds himself, boom, right in the middle on the frontier with us in Indian country, rockets are landing inside the camp. We're getting attacked all the time. And you're just like, what the crap is going on? What girl
did he piss off?
Yeah. But it was just like, oh, all right, cool. Right on, man. But that was a little different with the decompression because you couldn't leave it. And it's different when you go out and you fuck with somebody in their home and you fly back to a relatively well protected, base.
Yeah.
It's different when you're out there by yourself and they know where you're at and they know you're cut off and you can't sleep. You can't just, forget about it and go to the gym because they can shoot PKMs and stuff at the gym. So it's a little different there with us as far as the decompression. And I think it's part of it is internal with figuring out something that works for you, whether it's just thinking about it, maybe smoking a cigarette or something. I know that's contradictory to the whole health and fitness aspect, but just something that, takes your mind off of it. And then just talking to your buddies about it, dudes, guys love to tell the war stories of this is where I was doing, this is what I do. And it's and then I jumped on the 240 and I did this. No, it's a very cathartic and therapeutic thing, and I think
cops do the same thing.
Yeah. Guys have to talk through it. And I think that's something we don't acknowledge is by talking through it, you kind of are recognizing what happened and allows you to process it to some extent. So, yeah.
That's fascinating. I started watching last night. I've been watching it a little bits and pieces, but Korengal, Sebastian Junger's follow-up documentary to Restrepo, which is that's a well-known documentary. But I was thinking about that last night about just how isolated these guys are out in at Restrepo. And if anyone's not seen that, I highly recommend that documentary just to get a sense of what that's like being out there and just isolated. And you're right, they were talking about it actually in the piece I was watching last night about how you can never turn it off because they could start picking at you at any time, and you are by yourselves. I mean, it was the guy on your left and your right and you, and that's about it.
Yeah, that is. I really like that documentary. One of the things I really like about it is that it just shows that the infantry mission, it has not changed since antiquity. Basically, it's hard dudes with grit, and they're performing a hard mission under very harsh conditions. That's I think it's a very it informs the public and creates a level of respect for what those guys are doing over there.
Oh, yeah.
And what, you don't have to be in special forces. You don't have to be a Navy SEAL. Like I know a lot of like just infantry dudes. I don't mean to say just infantry dudes. Guys that are in the infantry,
right,
who did incredible things. Incredible acts of valor.
Oh yeah, they're all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, numerous. So with these multiple tours and kind of coming back, what are the lessons? I mean, you talked about a little bit about it in that moment of how to deal with the stress, but do you have any other long-term or maybe systematic or routines that you use to deal with that kind of stress? And then what do you teach your students nowadays in terms of how to deal with that stress?
For clarity, you're talking about stress like...
Well, stress like that, that direct action combat,
mm-hmm.
that kind of stress, or the stress of even just the perceived or potential threat. And that's what we deal with a lot, right? For cops, is that potential or perceived threat. It may not be real. The guy may not actually have a gun or may not actually be shooting, but it's the possibility that what you're getting into could lead to that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as big as, taking on a battalion of the Taliban, but in little bits and pieces, I think it's corrosive too, right? So how do we deal with that?
Yeah, so stress is compounding, and obviously it starts, at the tactical level in the engagement. Whether it's like you said, you have to, profile someone or is that not the right word to use for law enforcement? You can't
criminally profile.
Yeah, there we go.
We don't racially profile; we criminally profile.
There we go. Well, you have to identify if someone's going to be a threat or if they're, not a threat. So It starts there. That at a very low level, your switch gets flipped to like, hey, is this someone who might be an issue? And it carries through to whether or not you have to use some kind of non-lethal or possibly lethal action. And then it carries on beyond that to like, hey, how do I comprehend what just happened? Because this is actually one of the things I think military is getting a lot better about, is recognizing, you're in the military. If you're in combat arms, if you're in the infantry, you're going to go get in gunfights. You're going to see dudes get killed. If you're in SF, you're going to go get in gunfights. You're going to see dudes get killed. Mm-hmm. But also starting to recognize, like, that is a part of the job description, but what is the long-term effect that it's having on guys? And I think that, we started to see that after we got to, like, year 10 of the war. Now we're in, like, year 15.
Yeah, 15.
I mean, I know they're air quoting over, but what's that effect have? But also, look at the individual guys in law enforcement, guys in the military, very type A, personalities, where we don't want to show weakness because we don't want our buddies to think that, hey, I'm not going to be there for you, because the team is the most important thing. So it's, how do we create a culture where guys are like, they feel comfortable saying, hey, I'm burnt out, or hey, I'm kind of, thinking about this one thing a little bit too much. And I know from, my perspective in the military, we always had psychologists at group. That was, one of the very unique things that we had offered to us. And the big army has them usually just at like the medical centers or the hospitals. But there's a stigma about going in there. You don't want to go talk. You don't want your buddies to see you go in there and talk to them, or go talk to the chaplain or whatever, because it's just like, oh, is he okay? So you're dealing with a stressful environment, and then guys who are prone to not seek, kind of help for that. So how do we create a training environment that is, prepares guys for the tactical engagement? And then how do we create an organizational culture that allows guys to, have, I guess, like, emotional resilience would be the best way to describe it. At the tactical level, I think the best thing you can do is train someone so that they understand fundamentals and basics perfectly. Like, you need to understand, your marksmanship. You need to understand tactics at a very basic level. And then once you have that established, start to work with scenarios. And then even when you do your scenarios, don't make them crazy or over the top, because what we see is, what you learn in training, you're going to replicate in the real world. And, this with training on the range or training in the real world, we're always, again, we have a personality who's very, type A, guys in the military, guys in law enforcement. we oftentimes associate harder with better, which is not always true. Harder can be dumber.
Interesting.
Harder can be dumber. So it's, balancing, hey, are we spicing up training? What is the purpose behind this and what is it doing? So like when I'll teach a marksmanship class and I want to emphasize, when you're shooting with an elevated heart rate, and I want my students to shoot with an elevated heart rate, there is 1,000 ways I can have them get to that point where they have an elevated heart rate. I can have them do 20 burpees. I can have them maybe do a kettlebell carry or a short wind sprint. That allows them to create, an elevated heart rate. Then they go into a shooting exercise or, whatever the task may be, and they get to experience that increased stress level. What I don't like seeing is when it becomes less about what your original objective is, whether it's marksmanship or maybe some kind of scenario training, and you just unnecessarily smoke a guy. So like, hey, you're going to go run, 2 miles with a gas mask on. It's like, okay, but, do I need to do that? And it can distract. Now, if your intent is to smoke the dude, all right, cool, yeah, whatever. But if you're trying to build, law enforcement officers, if you're trying to build soldiers who actually have a strong foundation of skills they can rely on, you can't bastardize it with unnecessary flair. So it is each instructor's, it's his own right to figure out how to structure training that way. But, I really subscribe to the less is more outlook with, hey, let's make sure that we're really hitting the fundamentals up front for whatever the task might be, whether it's, calling for fire, putting a radio into operation, or, pulling someone over. Let's make sure we're really hitting the fundamentals up front so there's no, mistakes as to what right looks like. And then if we want to spice it up, we'll spice it up, but do it in a purposeful manner. So, like, again, if it's just marksmanship training, and I want someone to shoot with an elevated heart rate, hey, do 20 burpees, cool. Now, if it's a scenario and I want someone to have stress, I'm not going to be like in the middle of the scenario, like, hey, do 20 burpees before you go, bound to cover or whatever. Like, that would just be stupid because it distracts from what the objective is. And what is... Is the Newhall massacre the
CHP?
Yeah. Okay. So that was
right. Yeah. It's classically argued.
Yeah. I think of that where the guys had the shells in their pocket, and I've heard before that was just a rumor, or that
I've always heard that story is true. For people who don't know, outside of California, Newhall was an incident where 4, I think, CHP officers. Right? Was it 4 or 2? Might have been 2. Anyway, so they encountered, this was back in, I think, the 60s. It was back when they were using wheel guns. So.
Yeah, it was a good minute ago.
Yeah, and anyway, they encounter this subject, and 2 officers are shot and killed. And when the backup gets there, they find that the 2 CHP officers have their spent rounds from the revolver in their offhand. Because they're taught at the range, pew, 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 don't dump your ammo on the ground because we got to clean it up. So they would dump it into their offhand and hold on to it.
Yep.
And that true or not, that's been used by my firearms instructors as an example of train like you fight. And they even got away from using like the buzzer, and they're trying to replicate nowadays that trigger for a threat rather than just a beep or shouting threat on the range, or like, it's like they're trying to get closer and closer. But but that's what Newhall is the CHP officers were found with their spent casings in their hand.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up with the buzzer and the threat thing. I had, in all the training I'd done in SF, I had never once had someone scream threat, threat, threat when I was on a range. It was just like, wait, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So the first time I experienced that, I was just at a normal range here, and there was like some guy training. He was just like, all right, on my command. I was just kind of like listening to what's going on. He's like, threat. I'm like, whoa, what's going on?
That's pretty commonly used.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it has its utility,
It's utility. I mean, there's not many ways that you can, replicate an actual.
Yeah. Well, it's just funny when you see someone going to do like a reload drill and they're like, threat. You're like, well, he's just working on reloads. That's like, kind of scream in his face. But so, to answer that question about, structuring stress at the tactical level, I think it really does come down to, how you are setting up someone's mind for success. You know, the physical part, you know, that comes, but we have to really prepare their minds for success. And if you do it wrong, man, guys are going to do what they do on the flat range. And, you know, obviously that's, you know, not always going to be the end all, like, hey, I did 20 burpees on the flat range, I'm going to do 20 burpees. Like, no, like, guys can differentiate, but you have to be very careful with how you structure your scenario drills. Like, one of the, you know, the biggest things I've critiqued in the industry is like how guys are using vehicles. It's like, man, that can become very dangerous if you're not preparing a guy's mind for success by saying, hey, this is how this thing works in the real world, and this is how you should interact with it. Yeah. Versus just saying, hey, this is a cool shooting drill. You know, I'm going to, you know, have a really fun drill where we shoot all these targets. But, man, if you do some of that stuff in the real world, you can get fucking smoked. And, yeah, that's no bueno.
So those are some steps you take as an instructor. What about the things that you think are the key steps that your students or law enforcement or those people can take to help mitigate that stress? And you touched on it. I mean, like the repetition of the basics. So I'm basic pistol and rifle marksmanship, right? Imagine physical fitness and the preparedness there is another one. Anything else from a mental mindset, those kinds of things that you preach?
Yeah, it is more than just, you know, lifting weights and squeezing the trigger off. It is, you know, it is a mental thing, you know, priming yourself to say, hey, this is whatever the task is I want to accomplish, and then evaluating yourself at the end. It is, I think we waste a lot of time as tactical athletes not setting benchmarks or reviewing our performance. You know, we'll go to the gym and we'll have a workout routine that we always do, and we'll max out or something, or we'll see how fast we can run, you know, a mile or 2 miles. Marksmanship should be the same way. You should have benchmarks that you're holding yourself accountable to, and for some reason that doesn't transfer over a lot. You know, we don't. Well, it's not as fun. That's why. Is because it's more fun to go out with a box of ammo and some targets and say, I'm going to shoot this. But if you're not collecting data on yourself, you're not going to improve. And that's actually where a lot of guys plateau, is you have to do the boring, like, I have to collect data on myself and I have to check in periodically to see where my performance is. I might have to actually go to the range to shoot instead of, like, you know, making an Instagram video or something, you know.
So, but you mean like a benchmark shooting drill, something like that? Or, like, because I'm curious about this. Is actually a really interesting idea, because I mean, there's benchmark workouts, like, and CrossFit's kind of a thing about this show, and there's benchmark workouts there. I do a benchmark workout every couple months to kind of gauge where I'm at. It's never occurred to me to do a benchmark firearms drill, though.
Yeah, there's whether it's, you know, again, you're focusing on marksmanship or stress inoculation, there is, you know, something you should be doing to measure performance. Otherwise, what happens is you create this perception of your abilities, and, you know, the reality of it is very different. And if you're a tactical shooter, you know, if your perception of how your skills are on the flat range, you know, you know, everything in the real world, I'd say, gets dumbed down at least 20%, or your performance suffers at least that much, because, you know, there's a lot of different things going on. You could be fatigued, you could be stressed, you could already be shot or something.
Sure.
You know? So your performance is going to be different. So if it takes you, you know, 3 seconds to draw from your holster with a pistol, you know, it might take you 5 seconds, 6 seconds in the real world when you got that cortisol dump. Or is that the right chemical to be using for?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, yeah, all right, fair enough. Yeah, when you have that just dump of adrenaline, it's like, and, you know, your ability to, you know, finally grab things like a pistol out of its holster, it goes to shit, because, you know, you're trying to draw, you're seeing something happen in front of you, and like you were saying earlier, like, law enforcement has a lot of very close encounters where it's happening very quickly. So if we don't create those benchmarks, then we don't know what we need to work on. But also at the same time, it can give us, you know, that feeling of comfort knowing, okay, hey, yeah, I can perform under these, you know, conditions of stress.
Yeah.
You know, I can, you know, do whatever the task may be. Well, I at least know that this part of the equation is taken care of. Now, with regards to what actually happens in the real world, that's going to be different, but I know I've got this portion of my abilities taken care of.
It's, you know, it makes me think of something that happened to me not long ago. kind of in that discussion of, like your performance dropping, and you actually hit my example right on the head with drawing from a holster, and how. So I don't even remember the specific call, but I ended up, I don't know, 15 feet away from my suspect, and it was one of the few times, luckily few, where for 2.5 seconds of my life I was convinced and certain that I had to shoot this person.
Mm-hmm.
And in those 2.5 seconds was when, of course, you're going for your holster and you're drawing, and I was moving at the same time, and I struggled with a little bit. Now, it may have only been half a second or so that it slowed me. I honestly have no idea how much it may have slowed me down, but luckily that situation de-escalated very quickly, and obviously didn't have to use force, but it was a good reminder, a teller of a weakness.
Mm-hmm.
After the fact, when I'm kind of reviewing these things in my mind, that like I try to practice that stress inoculation a little bit, but in the real world situation with that real cortisol dump.
Yep.
And I went to shit a little bit, just a little bit, but enough that it made me very uncomfortable. I'm like, okay, well, that's obviously something I gotta work on getting better at. So
yeah, I think that's absolutely something that will make you a more well-rounded performer, whether it's marksmanship or whatever the task may be. I think the military's got it down pretty well with the whole stress inoculation thing, because they can just take away your chow and your sleep. So if you go to like ranger school, you get like on average like 3 hours of sleep a night. I think when you're out in the field though, when you're actually doing like your patrols, you're out there for like a week or 2 weeks at a time.
Yeah,
you're probably getting like no sleep the whole time. You might like get cat naps and stuff. So what you really start to see there with stress inoculation is the power of just repetition, like the benefit of just doing everything without any kind of like bastardized, crazy stuff added into it. Like, you don't need to karate kick someone in the face and then have them shoot El Prez, or you don't need to like duct tape someone's hands together and be like, go shoot your pistol now. It's like, that's fucking stupid.
Right.
But what you see is if you do everything right, when you do have stress, people are going to fall back on, okay, hey, react to contact. Okay, cool. We're going to bound forward. All right, cool. This is what happens. And you start to see it, at least on my side in the military, what I saw is when you're in those situations where, hey, we've been out in the field for 6 days now, no one slept, you're getting maybe like one meal or one MRE a day, MRE being a meal ready to eat. And so guys fall back to just what they know. Mm-hmm. And if they've been trained right, they're going to do it. If they've been, if they've had cool guy sexy training that's kind of been, crazy and, ruin their understanding, they might not perform at the same level. So you get a lot more mileage, I think, out of just, mastering the basics. And
what's that classic, we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. I
think that's like one of the iterations, or
one version of it anyway.
One version of it.
We're talking somewhat physicality or the physical training, but what about? Do you have any mental training or mental rehearsals or any tips like that for your students?
I think that priming yourself does have some significance. If you're, just recognizing your environment, what's going on, and then just also paying attention to how your body reacts to it, what startles you, what gets, what activates that fight or flight mechanism. So at least you understand why you're feeling a certain way. Mm-hmm. And then it can also just, start kind of like a process for you where it's like, okay, hey, this is, happening internally, and it's just kind of like a mental checklist you go through to actually like, hey, I'm about to go do something. So like, when, for myself personally, like being overseas on deployment, if we're getting ready to go on a mission, priming myself for what's about to happen, it starts with these routines, like checking my gear, checking, my role and responsibilities on the mission, just rechecking that. Looking at different aspects of the mission, maybe like, the route that we're taking. And then just other small things. They could be as insignificant as, I always eat this, type of power bar or something before going out. But it's just these mental things that you do that prime you. And then so that when you actually do get out to, you're on your infiltration or you're on the objective, whatever. You're in a certain mindset now.
Yeah.
That's obviously very different for someone like yourself in law enforcement, where you're just constantly plugged into your environment, and you don't know what could be happening. So it's it's a bit different, but you can still go through some similar processes. Like before you go out on patrol, there's I'm sure certain routines that you go through.
Yeah, for me, same sort of thing. I kind of check my gear. The problem with us is like, for you at least, I mean, in those scenarios of the military, it's like you have a sense or an objective, right? You have an idea of what's going to happen. Now, you may not really know what's going to happen when you get there, but you have a plan of intent, I guess, right? I mean, you have something you need to go accomplish, and then when that's done, you're going to come back. I don't start any of my days with any of that, right? I mean, I don't get into the beginning of my day and say, all right, today we're going to go out to this street and we're going to, set up a thing and then we're going to leave. It's 12 hours of, I don't know, I could be helping old ladies cross the street, or I could, like yesterday, my partners, end up in a high-speed pursuit with a Amber Alert suspect who's shooting at him in a running gun battle through the streets, and they dump the guy, and that could be my day too. Yeah. And it's just a matter of dumb luck if I'm helping grandma cross the street or I'm in a running gun battle. So that's a real challenge for us and me and everyone else, I think, is like, how do you stay sharp with those lulls like that? So I do that kind of ritual of getting dressed very intently, right? Checking my gear, being aware that what I'm putting on is body armor, being aware that I'm, my boots are laced correctly, or that they're tied well, and just kind of like going through my checklist of stuff. But once you're out in the day, and admin gets a hold of you, or special projects, or when it is a roller coaster of trying to stay sharp. Real challenge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It just becomes pickup basketball, I'd assume, where you constantly like, all right, I have this certain skill set, and I know this is what I might encounter, but I don't know what it's going to be, and so
right.
Yeah, it is a very unique challenge. But I think that priming yourself, having checklists, physically writing out your checklist also helps too. Like I had one of the things in my room where it was just a list of things I would check off. Like, hey, do you have your dog tags? Do you have your your mission specific tasks? Do you have your the info routes? Do you have them memorized? Stuff like that. It's just again something that you can set yourself up for success, because you can only set yourself up to a certain level of like, okay, I'm ready to go. You can't try to plan for everything that's going to happen out there.
Right.
You would fatigue yourself trying to plan out what's going to happen in your 12-hour shift. That'd be insane.
It'd be exhaustive.
Yeah.
But what I found is so in the event of like a critical incident or something big that's in progress now, especially as a supervisor, I do start that same priming over again, specific to that call of, okay, what am I dealing with when I get there? What am I going to need? What am I going to do? What's my routine going to be? What weapon am I going to pull out? I think we all do that mental rehearsal. I hope we all do some sort of mental rehearsal.
Just grabbing the quick.
Yeah, like just grabbing the beanbag gun and hoping for the best.
Yeah. Went to reload my pistol mag and it was a Snickers bar.
Right, exactly. That seems to be a big. You lessen the cognitive fatigue of the decision making when you rehearse those things, either en route or just in your downtime too. So let me ask, why did you get out of the military, if you don't mind me asking?
The reason I got out of the military is a reason a lot of guys don't readily talk about. And it's just 'cause I was burnt out, man. I was getting tired of getting shot at and blown up.
I don't know, Aaron. That seems pretty reasonable.
Yeah, well, but there, I still got buddies in that are doing it, and I'm not gonna sit here and complain because they're still out there doing the mission.
Yeah.
But a lot of guys they get to that point where they're just like, man, I don't know if I can keep this up. But no one ever says anything because, like I said, you got the buddy who's still going on the mission, so you're not gonna say that. You're not gonna say like, oh yeah, you're going to walk into the team room and be like, yeah, I'm getting out of the military because I'm tired of this shit. Like, because they'll just kind of turn their back on you, and you don't want to lose that support structure. Sure. So in 2012, I was in Afghanistan. That was my last deployment.
So 8 years?
Almost 9 years.
Holy
so I was at the halfway point where, you know, traditionally a lot of guys in the military do 20 years and they get to their retirement. So I got to that, you know, that point where I was kind of, you know, almost there at the halfway mark, and I could see the rest of my career kind of mapped out, and what that meant. But that last trip I had to Afghanistan, it was exhausting, and it was, you know, I was just tired after that. And it is, again, going back to one of the things we've been talking about earlier with the type of personalities that you find in law enforcement or the military, is you don't ever want to show like any kind of weakness. You know, you don't want your buddies to think that you can't pull through for them. Mm-hmm. So it creates this culture where you don't talk about it. You know, you don't talk about how you're burnt out. You don't talk about how, like, hey man, like, you know, I'm not, you know, feeling okay. So, and the other thing too is, like, you have buddies who got it worse. Like, you know, I think we had a pretty intense deployment in Afghanistan, but I know, you know, I have buddies who had even more intense deployments because they don't have legs, or, you know, they watch, you know, members of their team, you know, one after the other just get smoked. So it's like, well, I'm not gonna start complaining over here. But that narrative and that culture is starting to change though, in the military. I know it is in special operations. I don't know if, I can't speak for the, you know, the rest of the military, but I know they're trying to do a much better job of recognizing, you know, hey, you know, we've been asking a lot of these guys, and they continue to put themselves forward. You know, what is the long-term effect of that? Yeah. Just straightforward. And, you know, after that last trip, I was like, man, I can't keep doing this. This is wearing me out, you know, emotionally. And I decided to leave the military and look, you know, just move forward with a lot of the other opportunities that are out there in the private sector. And it's you know, transition is, I think, a big thing. Again, whether you're in military and law enforcement, I think transition out of that support structure that you have, out of that identity, out of that you know, sense of purpose, it's hard for guys, and it's also heartbreaking to see some of, like, you know, the best dudes that, you know, that you've worked with, like some just amazing, you know, just warriors, just to watch them kind of crumble the moment they leave the military, the moment they leave the team, they leave that identity, the, you know, that positive feedback loop of, you know, hey, I'm a Green Beret. Like, I have this sense of identity and purpose, or, you know, so it's, you know, it's heartbreaking to see guys that just, you know, they struggle with the, I don't like to say the term reintegrate back into society, but just, like, you know, the cultural shit. Yeah.
I heard an interesting theory yesterday, and maybe you can chime in on this, is that some of these guys they're having a problem not because of something maybe that they experienced, because they're perfectly capable of handling that experience. It's when they leave that close-knit community and they go back out into the general community, the American citizenry, where we are at odds with each other a lot, either racially or politically or socially, you know, whatever. Like, and we as an American society aren't as tightly knit and aren't as kind of in it for each other as the teams are. That's where they kind of lose it. I thought, oh, that's kind of an interesting take on it.
That is, that's very accurate. I think, you know, I joined the military when I was 18, so that was, like, you know, the culture that I knew throughout my entire adult life up until, you know, 2013, the summer of 2013 when I got out. So yeah, that team-based aspect of shared purpose and vision, you know, working together to accomplish a task, you know, being genuinely interested in, you know, someone else's life or, you know, what they value. A lot of that goes away in the private sector, where, you know, it's like, you know, no one else is going to look out for your self-interest. Like, you have to look out for yourself, but just, you know, the people putting forth the minimal amount of effort, you know, for a team or, you know, the company or whatever it is,
or their fellow citizen,
or their fellow yeah.
I mean, I have to imagine that, like, for you or anyone coming back from that and then coming back to seeing some of the things that we do to each other, is kind of maddening to like these. I don't know. I'm going off in a total different. This is interesting, because, like, I had, you know, I spent my entire adult life up until I was 28 on the teams. So, like,
my, idea of like being social with someone, obviously, like, a team environment is very different.
Sure.
You can be very crass and, you can behave differently, but the way that the level of which you interact with another person, I think is very in depth.
Sure. Yeah.
And then when I got just, out into, when I was just a nobody in the real world, nobody in the real world, I feel like
country song.
Yeah. Yeah. People are, at first I couldn't tell if people were just completely apathetic towards everything or if they were, uninterested because they were selfish or what it was, but just like people are just generally disinterested with anything that does not immediately reward them or further their narrative or their goal, whatever it is. And I was just like, oh, this is weird. Like I don't have to, have the same interests as you, but I can at least talk to you and find out why, you're passionate about that. And, I just find a lot of people, or I found a lot of people like my age or our age. It's just
appreciate you for looping me in on that. Our
you own
age.
it. You own it.
Our age must be a very flexible range.
Yeah. Well, it's just, you own an iPhone. We must be the same. Which Snapchat handle, bro?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just, the depth to which people connect over, either like nothing or like the absence of depth there. It's just like, okay, like this is weird that people are, I don't know if self-centered is the right word, but just if there's nothing in it for me, I don't care. It's like, oh, that's weird.
Yeah. So here's a question. We talk about like community and kind of joining. One thing that is super popular right now, and it's always been popular, but growing more and more, I think, with the closer that police departments align with sometimes the military or the growing threat to law enforcement too is the warrior mindset. This idea of just like we're warriors or whatever like that. And I'm getting more and more uncomfortable with that word in the context of me. I'm not uncomfortable with it in like for you in service there. I mean, I'm sitting across the table from a warrior, but I get more and more uncomfortable with using it in context of me or in law enforcement. So how do I phrase this? For someone who is unquestionably a warrior, what's your take on the current use of that term, either as it applies to just law enforcement or civilians who kind of attach to that, or even for the military?
I think that there's a lot of different directions you could go with that. I think there's the professional narrative where, you're talking about guys in the military or you're talking about guys in law enforcement. And like you said, maybe warriors, not the best word, but I think a lot of guys in law enforcement have like, the warrior spirit. They have the warrior mindset. And I understand that they might have, a very different mission set, but I've seen a lot of dudes and I've worked with, a lot of guys that I've trained. It was like, hey, I can recognize that you have the same values and outlook towards, your mission as like guys that I worked with, the Rangers that I worked with, the other SF guys I worked with. Like you have that warrior spirit, but I understand where you can kind of come into it might feel weird to be like, yeah, we're warriors, like, or
well, yeah. My challenge, I guess, is that it's like we're warriors, but we're out. Even our bad guy, like your bad guy, is a bad guy that everyone agrees upon, right? The Taliban or any of those people, ISIS. Those are bad guys, and most any American will agree with that. My bad guy is a fellow citizen.
Yeah,
and so. Even if there is people just like this guy yesterday, unspeakable evil that they can commit against their fellow citizens, but they're still a citizen. And my theater of operations is my community. So I understand why I'm more and more I'm understanding why people are sensitive to that, our use of it.
Yeah, and the professional context of that warrior mindset, and then even just like the regular. I guess civilian use of it. Nothing. I really dig the group of Americans that they believe in like their Second Amendment rights. They believe in being self-reliant. Being responsible for their own safety and are interested in their own personal defense. And then there's also this idea of like, the warrior mindset that's been highly commercialized with like the, I guess the best way to describe it would be like the tactical industrial complex, right, or something.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
And it kind of, but it shifts the meaning,
right,
of it, where it's like, a guy like yourself or a guy like myself, we can say something like, hey, the warrior mindset, and understand what we're meaning. But then there's also a cultural shift based off of like, okay, well, how are other people interacting with this, word? Is it like something that is a description that they truly respect? They respect the discipline of, whether it's, marksmanship or being self-reliant or, looking out for their community. Or for them, is it just wearing a ISIS hunter T-shirt and
pair of 511s?
Yeah, and then going on the internet, right, and being like, "That's not how you shoot a gun." Like,
hashtag sheepdog.
Yeah, I'm sitting across from Garrett in my Mohan Labe. Yeah, well, that's interesting because it's So there's the professional narrative, and and then there's the commercial narrative. And it's like, okay, so which one is which? Mm-hmm. Then, is the warrior the guy who's saying like ISIS hunter, like I don't need to wear an ISIS hunter T-shirt because I'm in the fucking military and I go kill ISIS, right, and I don't need to talk about it,
right?
Or like the guy in law enforcement who's like very difficult mission set, just as what you were saying earlier with you got a 12-hour shift, you don't know what's going to happen. What does that warrior mentality mean? Or what does it mean for the guy who's just taking Instagram pictures and arguing with everyone on the internet,
right?
In his, wearing his multicam tuxedo to go, shopping for groceries and just waiting for someone to challenge him.
So, do you think it's appropriate that law enforcement uses or aligns with the warrior mindset?
I don't see why. Again, a lot of the dudes that I've met, a lot of the guys in SWAT that I've trained, they embody a lot of the same characteristics and personality traits as the guys that I worked with on the teams. Obviously, you guys are held under a microscope if you start saying like we're warriors and we're going to go, shoot guys in the face. You guys are held accountable on a very high level.
That doesn't look good, and that happens. Yeah. That happens.
But like I think I don't think there's anything wrong with saying like the warrior mindset, like hey, physical fitness, hey, marksmanship, hey, martial arts, being a leader, being self-reliant. I don't think there's anything wrong with that use of the word.
Yeah.
Whether it's law enforcement or a guy who's a truck driver in the military, you can still have the warrior mindset and have different jobs. It's just, again, when you get into like the more commercial context, it starts to really devolve the significance.
Yeah. I want to talk about your training and all that. So, okay, so you got out of the military.
Mm-hmm.
That seems completely reasonable. And then you develop Guerrilla Approach. What's the whole the whole title? Or the Guerrilla Approach is the name of your firearms training.
Yeah. So. Company. The Guerrilla Approach. So,
what is
Sun Tzu defines the art of war? No. So the Guerrilla Approach, it goes back to that unconventional warfare mission that SF has, where you're going to be working with with brown dudes in flip flops. I can say that because I'm a brown dude. You're going to be working with indigenous personnel in very ambiguous situations.
We call it non-permissive environments.
Non-permissive environments.
I have to work that into I'm going to work that into a report sometime.
My safe space is your non-permissive environment. So it, you're working through that cultural barrier, that cognitive barrier, and you're training guys that you're going to take out on missions with. You're going to take them out on hits with you. So that really sharpens your abilities as an instructor, in that when you're working again through the cognitive barrier, the language barrier, and the cultural barrier, you can't add in any bullshit in your training. You need to train those guys to a standard so that they understand the fundamentals of whatever the task is, whether it's going to send in an ambush or set up a traffic stop. They need to understand what that is. And you need to be able to adapt very quickly in training, because, it's a guarantee that whenever you're working with indigenous personnel, that they're just going to ask, the why question. And, you've probably seen this a lot in law enforcement. I've seen it a lot in military where we adopt training methodologies that don't really make sense. We just adopt them because, the guy before us said it and the guy before him said that.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't really think about what it is that we're doing. So when you're in that, that unconventional warfare environment, you have to figure out how to effectively explain something, adjust on the fly. And you can't take shortcuts. You can't take shortcuts because, that dude that you're training in flip-flops with an AK is going to be the guy on your left and your right. And if you take shortcuts with him, or if you try to do stupid stuff to jazz up training that distracts his learning process,
right,
it could be you getting smoked because of it. So that's where I got, the idea for the guerrilla approach was, hey, SF's approach with training guerrillas is just, no nonsense, brilliance in the basics, kind of a crawl, walk, run structure, which is very different than, a lot of the commercial training industry where it's just the, whatever's the flashiest thing or whatever's the newest thing. That's what people associate with being right. If I wanted to make $1 million, I would just light myself on fire and put it on Instagram and then shoot a gun, and then people would be like, "Oh, this is awesome!"
Call yourself Instructor 1 or something.
Yeah.
Instructor 0's already taken. So.
Yeah, well, yeah. If I wanted to make the most money in this industry, I would have no background, and then I would.
Well, okay, so I'm not going to ask you to dime anybody out, but
I think you already did.
I took one. I'll take the hit for that. I'm not afraid of that one. But there's only one of you, and you do your trainings around the country. But how can someone who's looking to the challenge we have is that I kid you not, there's been times or there's been quarterly qualifications where, with budget cuts and everything else, they hand me 5 bullets and they go, "All right, here's your qual for the quarter." I'm like, "Really? Five bullets, huh? That's all you guys can afford?" So a lot of us seek out this extra training on our own, buy our own ammo, go out and shoot on the range. We want to get good training from knowledgeable people. What's a good process for people? How do they know they're not getting bullshitted? If they can't come to your class, and I ask you this specifically because you are on your Instagram. You're honest about your opinion about some of these other schools. Not naming them.
I would say the schools, but the methodology.
I guess that's part the more. So, how does someone weed out, legitimate training versus showy, fancy?
I think that a good metric is, well, one, what's the dude's background? Mm-hmm. That's the biggest thing. Is, hey, if I'm a guy teaching you about, gunfights, have I ever been in a gunfight? That's a pretty big, I think, qualifier for, that kind of training. Now, are there guys, there's guys in law enforcement and the military that can do, 25-year career and never get in a gunfight, but they can teach you probably a lot about tactical marksmanship. It's just certain things happen in your career that determine whether or not you actually get in a firefight or 2 or 3 or 10 or whatever.
10 years in, I'd still have a hard time wrapping my head around what the sheer dumb luck or bad luck or good luck or whatever it is of being the guy that gets in those.
Yeah. So that's the biggest thing is credentials. And I look at training in 2 ways, range training. So there's marksmanship and then there's tactical training. If you're doing tactical training, upfront credentials. A dude should come from, I think, the most elite component of that organization, or you should seek out that individual because there's, a chance that they're probably going to have, a better grasp of stuff. I'm not saying that other guys can't, but, if you're using just, a filtering system, that's a great way to go about it. With regards to marksmanship, I think that you should keep an open mind and be willing to learn from, everybody. I go shoot different competitive matches, and you can learn something from different people. Now, you still have to have some kind of legitimacy factor in there. If someone's telling you something that's like that might work for you, it might not work for me, but I think you should keep as open of a mind as possible with marksmanship. If there's some fat dude that can run the hell out of a pistol, like, cool, take his class. He might not be like Mr. Tactical Operator, CrossFit guy, but if he can teach you something about cycling the gun, awesome. Now with tactical training, which is really more the area that I focus on, credentials is the biggest thing, and then if they've actually done the thing that they are talking about. And then 3, when you're in the training program or when you're doing your research, how far do they deviate away from basic, fundamentals, explaining basic tasks, is if they are going to have, some spiced up training where maybe you're doing like I said, you're going to do 20 burpees before you shoot your gun. Are they explaining, hey, the reasoning behind this is to have you shoot with an elevated heart rate, and they're not, distracting from what the overall objective is, which is, the marksmanship component. How far, are they turning the range event into a CrossFit with shooting, or is it still shooting with some physical exercise? And that can be hard for guys to identify because we've seen this paradigm shift in how courses are marketed because of social media. 5 years ago, a lot of the stuff that we see on the internet, we would have just laughed at and been like, oh yeah, whatever. But like now, like today, 2016, you see the same ridiculous stuff and you laugh at it, but then you check back in a week later and you're like, holy crap, that dude's teaching people. And you're like,
yeah,
what the, that's something else. So it can be confusing for the guy who has no background. So like, what about just the armed citizen that wants to be self-reliant, wants to, he's into the personal defense aspect. How does he filter that out? Because, like I don't know anything about golf. And if I wanted to go, other than I would love drinking beer while playing golf.
We play golf the same way.
Yeah, same outlook there. But if I was shopping around for golf instructors and I saw a dude who was wearing, the funny clothes and he had some really nice looking clubs and what he said seemed to be making sense,
right?
I'd be like, okay, yeah, I'll pay him. And then, I might not know if I'm getting a quality product. I might be enjoying it, but enjoying something is very different from learning.
Right.
You can have fun while you're learning, but sometimes the best learning takes place when there is that absence of that.
Still not
factor.
Effective, right?
So I think that the best way people can set themselves up for success is, if you don't have those, that if you're not in law enforcement, if you're not in the military, to where you can kind of identify what right looks like, or you have some idea. Just take classes from, different people, like, hey, there's this, I'm really into, concealed carry or whatever. Like, all right, so go to different guys that present themselves as experts in those areas, and that'll help round out your understanding of what's going on. But the number one thing I can recommend is just not go straight onto the internet and start telling people this is how you do something, because then you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
I took 2-day rifle class. This is how you shoot from a vehicle. Like, whoa, what the heck's going on?
I was prepping for today. I went on YouTube and like typed in firearms instructor and the gobs and gobs of hits that came back on it. And I went a couple of pages deep on stuff, and I was seeing some interesting setups.
Well,
put it that way.
And that's what inspired me to take the stance that I have in just like the training industry. So to be honest, until I got out of the military in 2013, I really didn't know anything about the commercial side of training. I was very fortunate in that, being in SF, we had, awesome individuals. We had awesome cadre guys that, had lots of experience. We could do a lot of training on our own, and any kind of commercial school we did go to, we were aware of like, hey, you're going to this, shooting and driving school where the shooting part's kind of but the driving part is awesome. So, just know that that's why we're sending you there. So we had, these ways for filtering out what was, kind of nonsense. So when I first started doing research into the commercial training industry in like 2013, 2014, I was just like, just what you were describing, when I went on the internet, I was just like, what the crap is going on? And it was this thing where I was like, am I the only person that's like, no, there's no way I'm the only person that's like, what the crap's going on? And then you discover that it's, a lot of it's just clever marketing. It's leveraging someone's, they might have a credential, but it might be very, modest. and then just marketing the hell out of it. And it's like, okay, I can see
a lot of good marketing.
Yeah, that's essentially what it is. But that's, what motivated me to take the stance I did with, the critiques that I write or the polemics that I write is that, again, when it comes to marksmanship, keep an open mind. You might learn something from, a 12-year-old 3-gun champ or something. You can
hunters and even those,
absolutely. But when it comes to tactics, like, man, there's a cutoff point where it's like, if you are bastardizing the stuff that we learned because guys have gotten killed. So we build our foundation of tactics off of, what does work and what doesn't work. If you're bastardizing what that is because you're trying to fill a class, that's I think that's just like really intellectually dishonest,
Yeah.
So that got me to the point where I was like, all right, the internet doesn't want to see. They don't want to see another video of a guy showing you how to reload a gun. They don't want to see another video of you saying, hey, this is how you draw from the holster. We've got plenty of those videos out there. What I think they want is, shooters, they want to see a discussion on, hey, this is why I believe in something and here's why. Not just like, hey, this is fucking stupid. That's,
right.
That's not where you put your flashlight on your gun. Like that's dumb. There's no reason to have that. But to have like a legit discussion about like, hey, these guys are teaching tactical classes and they're putting out stuff that's like, hey, man, I understand that what you're trying to say might have some internal validity for that specific exercise, but in the real world, that's going to get dudes killed. And that's something that's something that should be discussed. Right. And, people responded to it. They're like, I think that's the silent majority responded. They're like, oh, okay, cool. Because I get a lot of DMs on direct messages on Instagram. I don't know why I had to explain what DM was as if a podcast audience didn't know what.
Oh, you'd be surprised.
But I get a lot of messages where guys are just like, hey, man, this is really awesome what you're putting out. Like, hey, man, this is pretty cool. A lot of guys have a similar narrative where they're like, hey, I thought I was the only one that was like, what the crap's going on? They're just like, thank you for being, providing some kind of, discussion
some
here.
brevity to this. And it reminds me of do you follow the Article 15 guys at all?
Yeah,
Article 15.
I'm familiar with their
Matt
stuff.
Best, he put out, and they have a funny video, how to be tactical.
Yeah,
and they kind of make fun of all these.
They
YouTube.
They went for everybody.
Celebrities. They went after everybody. Yeah. I'll put it in the show notes because it's funny based on the topic we're talking about. Like,
they go after a lot of the rock star instructors. And
they go after like Chris Costa and Instructor Zero and a couple others. But so here's a question I'm always curious about. Cops are a funny group, very closely aligned with military guys. A lot of veterans are cops, right? And I have a lot of partners who left the law enforcement side to go do a tour, in the National Guard or reserves or signed up. But my perspective is, or my experience is just on the law enforcement side. But we go to a class, we all sit in the back. Nobody fills up the front. Mm-hmm. It's very hard to get cops to do anything. Like we are, as a group, I don't know. We're
naturally skeptical.
We're naturally skeptical.
Yeah.
We're reluctant to. I don't know. We're skeptical of everything. I guess we'll go with that.
I think it's a byproduct of your job, where you have to.
Your skepticism and your cynicism is what keeps you alive. Mm-hmm. But we're also sometimes a tough crowd, I guess is what I'm getting at, right? Mm-hmm. We're a tough crowd. So what's some of your biggest challenges when you're teaching law enforcement officers, maybe versus a civilian or maybe someone who's come out of the military?
The biggest, so with professional guys employed by the state, like military law enforcement, the biggest issue I have is running into the 22-year-old version of myself on the range who is, very eager to get after it, wants to prove himself, and as a result of that, likes to disagree because it feels empowering. It feels like you're in control of the situation, or it makes you feel like you know something, because nobody wants to admit, like, hey man, I don't know how to do that. Especially the more time you get on a team or in law enforcement, it's like less likely you want to be saying like, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, there's an expectation you already know how.
Yeah, so that's the biggest issue I run into, is running into 22-year-old cherry Sergeant Aaron Barruga is the guy who's just kind of like, just very motivated, very cynical though, and wants to be right. So it's finding out how to mentor those guys, and it's again, I was like that when I was.
I think we're all like that at that age, right?
Yeah, where you just like you want to find it's a control thing. If I can disagree with this, I'm right, or it makes me feel experienced. It makes me feel like I have some kind of veterancy. I don't know if I just made up a word there with veterancy.
I like it.
Yeah,
we'll go with it.
We're gonna roll with it. Is teaching that guy and teaching. So the easy thing to do is you can just embarrass him up front, but then he's not going to learn anything.
Right. He's going to shut down on you.
And then it's you're not doing him any favors or his team any favors. So a lot of some guys will just like bring that guy in front and be like make him demo something, and you can all see where his weaknesses are. But again, that might just shut him down because then he'll just become really self-conscious and he won't learn the rest of the time that you're there training. So it's figuring out how to read the class. So you have your objectives, your training objectives is like, hey, we will end the day with like, in-depth discussion on shooting and moving or whatever. But then you have to also look at the performance aspect of it too, where it's like, hey, what is this group getting? Are they, do I need to stick to the strict timeline that I have of like, hey, at 10 a.m. we're shooting this drill, at 11 a.m. we're shooting this drill, at 12 p.m. we're shooting this drill? Or do I need to be able to modify my material? And that goes back to that whole guerrilla approach thing.
Right.
Look at me plugging my own company in the middle.
Oh, we're going to get to that in a second.
No, but that goes back to what I learned in SF where, when you're running a range, you have an idea of what's going to happen. And then you might have to adjust because, hey, it turns out maybe these guys need a lot more work on their trigger control. Hey, maybe they need a lot more work on their ability to focus and rapidly process information. So it's being able to adjust on the fly. If you have, difficult personalities, I think the best way to deal with them is to just engage with them, and then, don't be confrontational, but just like, oh, hey, like, why do you think this? Like, okay.
All right. So, Guerrilla Approach, you explained the concepts and kind of that idea. Where can people go to learn more about taking a class from you and your methodology and your mindset?
So if they wanted to learn about my methodology, they should go to Soldier Systems and just look up any of the different pieces I've written for them. A lot of the topics that I discuss are, they're intended to start a discussion about, what seems to be very mainstream, but why it's also contradictory to what actually happens in the real world. So like what we were talking about earlier, where a lot of training is just, it's not very legitimate. It's just very cleverly marketed. So that'll cue them into a lot of my approach, if you will, with training. And then the website is just guerrillaapproach.com. Guerrilla spelled like
guerrilla warfare, not gorilla at the zoo.
You'd be surprised.
I know. That's why I'm saying it.
Yeah. And then obviously there's the social media handles, which is just guerrilla_approach on Instagram. And then Facebook is just Guerrilla Approach for the page.
Yeah, you post a lot of cool videos. So if for anyone who's on Instagram, you got to check out and follow you, because you'll post stuff up there. I'm like, oh man, that looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been interesting, just navigating the whole Instagram thing, because it is an incredible platform for engaging with your audience. But it's also just it creates this weird window where it's like you see a lot of stuff and you're like, is that what people are thinking, or just what sticks? So obviously there's like the entertainment component, then there's like guys like myself who go in there and they'll discuss something, and then there's the guys or the gals that just like take pictures in their underwear or something with a gun. And it's like, I don't understand what that's supposed to be for, but okay.
Yeah. I was going to say something, but I'm not going to, about the Instagram celebrity kind of thing. But
that's a thing. That's a thing of our generation.
Do you know that there's actually a convention in LA for like YouTube stars, like people who want to become a YouTube star or an Instagram star or Twitter? And they're like, there's a whole convention and they teach them how to, do all these things. And there's no discernible like talent to it. It's just like, oh, I want to be a YouTube star.
Well, to be fair, some of the people that are very successful at that, there's a lot of work that goes into it. I mean, they make
no doubt.
They make it seem very raw in that, I have an iPhone or a GoPro and I just film something, but there's a lot of, a narrative that goes into, what they're going to be saying, or work with the narrative, and then a lot of editing. But it's
just funny how it's a thing now, though. Everyone used to want to be a TV or movie star, but now people want to be YouTube stars or Instagram stars. It's like.
Well, I think Gawker just did an article about how the whole influencer economy is like collapsing in on itself. Yeah. About how hey, I'm taking a picture with my protein powder or whatever. It's like, people are starting to get away from that because
they're smelling it.
Well, everyone's
the BS.
Yeah, everyone's doing it.
Right. Well, speaking of Instagram whores, follow me on at the Squad Room. Aaron, you can follow Aaron on Instagram at, like I said, Guerrilla Approach, Guerrilla_Approach. Guerrilla is Guerilla.
2 R's.
So, oh gosh, even I got it wrong. Guerrilla, 2 R's, _Approach.
Guerrilla Approach, GUERRILLA_APPROACH.
Thank you for clarifying that. I'm going to blame that on my spell check for not catching that when I wrote all these down. But check it out for some cool videos. The website is GuerrillaApproach.com. To follow the Squad Room, it's at the Squad Room, both on Instagram and Twitter. Our website is thesquadroom.net. Head over there for show notes for this and some links to the videos we talked about, and a link up to some of your solar systems articles as well, so people have one place to go for all that. If you have a moment, please consider leaving a review on iTunes, everybody. It really helps out the show. Again, I want to thank SB Tactical and the iCombat Training System for their support of the show. Check them out and check out their individual officer iCombat Pro at sbtactical.com, where for orders are already being taken. Aaron, thanks for coming by, man. This was a lot of fun for me. Nice to get to know you. Thank you for your service. It's Memorial Day weekend, so I'm sure that this won't come out on Memorial Day, but really nice to talk to you today on that day, and with that in my mind, and then with like these events of yesterday on my mind too, of us. So thanks for what you do for law enforcement, your support of law enforcement. Obviously, thanks for your service too. Some really great concepts that I got out of you in terms of the warrior mindset and the commercial versus the professional. I like that. That was interesting, and I'm gonna have to think on that one for a while.
You have to take your Moan Lave tonight we dine in hell shirt off.
But no, it was a lot of fun, fascinating path that you've taken to get here, and I appreciate you sharing your knowledge now with all of us.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, Garrett.
Thank you.